Hey guys, it's Adam from LUCIDPIXUL and welcome to my first official art talk of 2022. And I thought I would start this fresh new year by ripping off a fellow YouTuber's idea. Tom Scott, the beloved British YouTuber Tom Scott, who everything he touches turns to gold. He posted a video that I watched just today where he reflected back on a video he recorded 10 years ago, exactly, back in 2012, where he made predictions on where the world would be today, 10 years later in 2022. So Tom Scott watched this video and scrutinized the hits and misses and then made his predictions on where he felt the world would be in 10 years from now. A video that we can reflect on and see what he hit and missed today. I want to do exactly that. But of course, I can add the extra ingredient art to the conversation. I want to predict where I feel art is going to be in 2023. A video that we can reflect on 10 years from today and see just how much I got wrong, and maybe I might get a couple of hits. We'll see. Some of these will be predictions based off of trends that I witnessed through the 20-30 years of my own career. Others will be wish lists, fantasies, things that I would love to see happen, but aren't necessarily too far-fetched because, well, fantasies very often become reality, and fantasies are very often manifestations of where we almost are or where we could be, things you'd really, really like. And those fantasies very often become grounds for innovation that a lot of, well, if companies pay attention, might become a reality, and these become very successful products. And I feel that some of these nice to have things have a very good likelihood to become reality. So to organize my thoughts, and again, thank you to Tom Scott for your great idea. I wanted to break it down into 3 separate categories, just to give myself a little bit of structure. Art technology, obviously. Art styles that might be popular, or new art styles that don't exist that might become popular. And lastly, art careers. Now here's the thing. I have a bit of an advantage that Tom Scott does not. The main reasons I wanted to do this was because my audience are artists. We are creators by nature. We live in this realm of taking ingredients that nobody thought of slapping together and creating fancy recipes with them. So the whole purpose of me doing this video, of wanting to do this video, is not because I want to tell you how much I got right in 10 years. I'm doing this quite literally to start a dialogue. I want you to piggyback off of my ideas and run with them, because I know you will. And reaching out to a vast community of creative people, this is going to create an absolutely brilliant and exciting dialogue. And that's exactly why I'm doing this. So to start with art tech, I think it's not too much of, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to predict that VR, or at least AR, which seems to be more of the deal, at least in terms of creation, that AR or VR and 3D sculpting will start to become a lot more mainstream, specifically for 2D artists. In fact, if I can take that one step further, my prediction is that 3D and 2D will in large part merge to become a single practice, thanks to things like AR and VR and 3D sculpting. And like I said, this isn't too much of a stretch. And the reason being is, for myself and for a lot of fellow traditional purely 2D artists that draw and paint on a two-dimensional surface, when they pick up a 3D sculpting software like Mudbox, for instance, we completely go to town with it. We have a blast with it because it allows us to create using our 2D skills. We don't have to worry about vertices and edges and planes and extrusions. We just click on a brush and we play with it. The same way we would if we picked up a a ball of clay and move it around. It's a very liberating way for a 2D artist to be introduced into the world of 3D. And not only me, for instance, I've been working with my beloved tattoo artist, Julie Hamilton, and we were sitting down concepting, kind of brainstorming where she would be moving forward with a design she was working on. And she was working using a 3D software, a sculpting software on her iPad, which I incidentally have right here. I ended up buying it. Nomad. Completely fell in love with it. She was using Nomad to sculpt out her ideas. And it was absolutely brilliant. And I ended up picking it up too, and I ended up playing with it. It's an absolute blast. And where I feel that 2D and 3D will be merging is in the sense that technology is getting so powerful. The ability to create a painterly brushstroke in a three-dimensional space without the burden of lag is it's happening right now as we speak. And even if you look back years back, I remember a video posted by Glenn Keane, the lead Disney artist, who is exploring VR in drawing, where he was drawing with this wand thing, and he did a three-dimensional sketch that you could walk through of Ariel from The Little Mermaid. And it was very much in its infancy, but he did it many years ago, and here we are in 2022, really pushing the boundaries of AR and VR. I really think that this is going to become a very exciting tool where 2D artists and 3D artists will no longer be torn apart by a rift the way they were back when 3D first surfaced, where you either had to be a hippie classical traditional artist or a techie futuristic 3D artist. These two worlds will collide in a very nice way, where perhaps certain 3D artists or certain digital artists will be more 3D technical oriented, and others will be more traditional oriented, but that gap will be less evident. And these two artist types will probably share the same space a lot more than they are today. And I don't think 10 years is too short a time frame. I think that can very much happen in the next 10 years. VR and AR is definitely a technology that's being pushed quite a bit. And I think this is a good use for it. My next prediction, and I've got a list in front of me. I have a little bit of a checklist. My next, and a few of these will sound very, quote, Apple fanboy. And you'd think, oh, Adam just switched to a Mac recently, so all of his predictions are going to favor Apple. Yes, they will. But for logical reason, you're going to see it's not so much of an Apple fanboy. It's that I can see the direction that technology is going, and I would really love to see certain things happen based off of what already exists. I feel that Apple will start making a few important moves moving forward for artists. And one, like I mentioned before, will have to do with AR, but the second will have to do with Macs. Apple has really kind of taken the world by storm with this whole M1 technology, with their own technology, where the computing power of these processors, and soon to be, I imagine, graphic cards as well. Their GPUs and CPUs their GPUs will start catching up with their CPUs, meaning graphic cards and processors for people who don't know what those terms mean. That they are really going to be pushing the boundaries for artists in a very, very profound way. Confided, Apple have always been a very art-friendly company. They've always, working on a Mac in Photoshop, albeit even though it's exactly the same app as on a PC, you can see a lot of these apps where you can see how they were originally designed on Apple. In case you didn't know, Photoshop was originally created exclusively for Apple. Yes. And then that it ended up evolving into Windows computers. But my prediction is going to be, and it's a very big wish list item, like if Santa Claus is listening, I want him to listen right now. I have a very strong feeling that the Apple Pencil that is currently only usable on an iPad will hit desktops, where Apple will create a pen display Mac. And this is something I've wanted long before I ever got. This is something I wished for 5-6 years ago. Just imagine a pen display Mac utilizing Apple Pencil, at least the future version of Apple's Apple Pencil. I think this would be a hugely big deal, especially since Apple creates such like the lovely thin displays. The M1 is powerful as hell and produces little to no heat. It is whisper quiet. It is cold to the touch. They are primed and ready for this next step. And when this happens, whack 'em, watch your tail, because they're coming to get you. Not that I wish ill on Wacom, but I think they've gotten a little bit complacent. A couple of companies have gotten a little complacent because they had a really good head start on the rest of the industry. I absolutely love Wacom products, but they do tend to kind of overprice their crap a little bit and suffer a little bit of a personality flaw that I find another company I'll be mentioning soon possesses. That they don't always listen to their customers. And sometimes they offer products and innovations that nobody bloody asked for, and they charge people for it. Like a rotating 32-inch display. Like who the hell will ever make any use out of that kind of a thing, right? So things like that, or putting, or making, pen displays where the camera's on the side rather than on the middle front where people would normally be using it, so that when they go on webcam, you see the left side of their face. Little stupidities like that. Not a big deal. I love what Wacom produces. I'm a big fan. It is my go-to tool. But when Apple decides to release a pen display, an Apple Pen Display Mac, it's going to be, the gloves are off at that point. And we're right around the corner from that. That said, if and when they do, which I really hope they do, I hope desperately that they fix one glaring flaw to their technology. Wacom use magnet technology to track the pen placement of their pen, whereas on an Apple, on an iPad, it uses Bluetooth, and therefore the cursor, when scaling it particularly, does not track the pen. And this, to me, for most apps, makes it a very unpleasant experience. I really avoid it unless I have no other choice. One of the main reasons I don't use my iPad to draw exclusively, unless I'm just doing a sketch, I don't use it for painting most of the time, is for the very reason that when I'm scaling a brush, I can't scale the brush where my pen is located. So if they can find a way to fix that one issue and keep everything else the same moving forward, rest assured, I am jumping on board immediately. This is probably the top of my wish list. Now combine this with something like AR. I don't even know where they could take it, but I know that moving forward, I think that AR, and this is a prediction I actually made many years ago, AR is going to replace computer screens. We're talking about a little bit further off into the future, past pen displays. Where imagine, for instance, being able to not have a computer screen in front of you at all, drawing on a wall, on a surface, drawing on the top of your table, having a drafting table sitting in front of you and just projecting an AR image on top of it and picking it up and moving it to a place in your room and using your entire room as your art gallery. Instead of being confined to the size of your computer screen and painting on your computer screen, you can draw in front of you, take that image, move it over to your right, throw it up against the wall somewhere or in some negative space floating around in the middle of your room, and then go back to your drawing and have an entire three-dimensional workspace to work on. Tell me that doesn't sound pretty bloody exciting. And this is actually something I predicted back when I might have even spoken about it in an earlier video. What the hell is his name again? It was a TED Talk about a guy who was talking about augmented reality, where he was kind of like the first early innovations of AR. We had this kind of projection that he could project onto surfaces, like projecting a watch onto his wrist, or projecting the flight times onto his plane ticket. When looking at the plane ticket, it would be able to scan his environment from his head, essentially some rig he had on his head or on a necklace or something like that, and it could augment his reality. And I had made a prediction and even contacted him directly about this, talking about how you could use an innovation like that and open up a sketchbook and project a drawing onto a sketchbook. It was, I might have been jumping the gun a little bit, but not anymore. We're kind of on the cusp of that right now. Moving on. Remember I had mentioned how I felt Wacom were getting a little complacent. And I don't mean this in a way of saying, they suck and I hope they fall apart. No. It's a way of saying, keep your eye on the competition because they're right on your ass right now. That's what I meant to tell them. Okay, so I don't want Wacom to fail. I want them to start paying attention. That's what I want. The other company, I hope, does this, and I've been hoping, unfortunately, for longer than I'd like to have hoped. Adobe. Adobe has, for as long as we can remember, since the digital painting space is open, they've been, the king and queen of the domain, with all the whole suite of apps. And this Adobe Photoshop is still my go-to app. It's what I use and I paint on every single day, and I teach on. And every studio across the planet, in most part, if they're going to use a software, they use Adobe Photoshop. And mainstream Adobe Premiere and Lightroom and After Effects and you name it, the whole suite. Audition. However, for artists specifically, and even for video producers, but for artists, for 2D artists, I have been annoyed by them endlessly. When Adobe reached out to me about a year ago and asked me if I wanted to do a review of Adobe Photoshop for the iPad. And my response to them was, well, that's so sweet of you to reach out to me. I really think it shows a lot of character for you to reach out for my opinion on it, taking into consideration how much I completely trashed your app a couple of years ago when it first really, if you look at my review of the Adobe Photoshop for the iPad, it was the biggest disappointment I'd have ever seen. It's the worst crap garbage app I've ever seen. It was tone deaf as an app. Well, I guess they hadn't, because I never heard back from them again. That said, Adobe just seemed to disappoint me all the time as a company. They don't pay attention to the customers. I'll give you a perfect example. I switched to Mac recently, to an M1 Mac, and one of my beloved color pickers, a necessity for me as an artist, is the Coolerus color picker. Absolutely love it. There's also Magic Picker, but I personally much prefer the Coolerus app. And it's been an absolute necessity for me as an artist working with that color picker, namely because the color picker for Adobe Photoshop is absolute ass. It is garbage. The color swatch is 1 centimeter. You can't have RGB sliders and the color wheel simultaneously. Their color wheel is not complementary. It's just a complete mess. So of course I would depend on the Coolerus color picker, but apparently, from what I've heard, Adobe Photoshop no longer supports Coolerus and Magic Picker, third-party color picker apps, locking them out of the Adobe ecosystem. So you have to use Rosetta, which unfortunately just doesn't hold up. It's not good enough. So I'm forced to use their default color picker, which has been nothing but a thorn in my side ever since I switched. The number one thing that irritated me and upset me switching to an M1 Mac. Not because I'm disappointed with the M1, I'm disappointed with Adobe. And mark my words today, if Adobe come out with a color picker that is a ripoff of Coolerus, I'm going to let the world know real fast. Because why hold back great innovation and great design unless you're trying to benefit from it personally? So keep note of that, if you will. If Adobe don't pick up their game, you can tell that moving forward, there are a lot of apps that are very quickly catching up. And if you look at what everybody's been predicting with regards to iPads and iPad apps and what people are hoping for moving forward with iPads, they're saying, why can't you A, make MacBook's touchscreen? Or why can't you put full apps, actual desktop apps on an iPad? Because now with the M1 Max, they're completely capable in terms of power. Why haven't Apple done that? Well, I'm going to give you my answer to why Apple haven't done that. I already did. Their pen display. A Mac pen display, an Apple Mac pen with a pen display on it. That's what's going to happen. So they won't need to alter either or. They're going to merge them into a single technology. They'll have the iPad portable version and they'll have the desktop version. Take your pick. Or technically both. You'll have a large desktop iPad that you'll be able to stick on a stand and turn into a pen display using magnets or something. Maybe you'll use MagSafe or something. Who knows? But think about how easy it would be for Apple to make that technology at this point. Think about that innovation. What does that mean for apps? That means that apps like Procreate, Art Studio Pro, Clip Studio Paint, Corel Painter, all of these will be designed specifically for Apple, specifically for this kind of an ecosystem, where the desktop app and the iPad app will essentially become the same thing. Everything will be desktop apps everywhere. And when that happens, Adobe's days are numbered. Just like Wacom their days are going to be numbered, Adobe's days are going to be numbered too. And again, I'm not saying this because I wish ill on Adobe, but I don't have any loyalty to them because I've seen for decades how they just ignore their customers. They have always ignored their customers, and they've become too big for their britches. They're so disconnected up on their thrones that the simpletons, the commoners, the common rabble are catching up and starting to innovate beyond what Adobe is doing. And, well, if it happens, good riddance to bad rubbish, in my opinion. They've had it coming for longer than I'd like to admit. Now, while we're on the topic of Apple and Wacom, we're definitely going to see big innovation with regards to styluses. And this isn't so much of a prediction. It's more of we're pretty much there already. It's just about the advancement in the direction that technology is already going. But for instance, bridging that gap between a traditional handheld pencil and a stylus pencil. And Apple has the feel, Wacom have the power. In my opinion, I prefer drawing with a Wacom pen, but I prefer the feel of an Apple pencil in that regard. And if you need to have a thicker Apple pencil, then throw a grip on it, right? Just pen tips makes pen grips and stuff like that. They're great. That technology is going to advance to the point where if you really want to draw using the side of your pencil and really wanting to use the real tilt functionality for drawing, that is absolutely the difference between drawing with a pencil in your hand and drawing with a stylus. That gap will be completely closed, in my opinion, long before 10 years passes. However, where I think something else will start to really innovate, and I had actually a student who does really play in this domain, both in a traditional and a technical sense, Jonathan Simpson, if you're listening, shout out to you, is that traditional fine art painting, oil painting, and acrylic painting, but specifically oil for a specific reason, will start to become more mainstream for digital painters. And what I mean by this is, if you paint with oil, if you've ever painted with oil, which I don't do in most part, my mother does, she's an oil painter, but one of the things that digital painting lacks is depth, right? We have texture, we have color, we can mix colors, we have access to a whole color palette, we can mimic the look and feel of traditional paint using something like Corel Painter, for instance, but digital painting does not have the depth that smearing, three-dimensional, light-catching, more oily versus less oily oil paint can produce. A drier medium, a wetter medium, to be able to look back and forth at a work of art and sense that three-dimensionality of those brushstrokes. How you can, if you've ever seen a Rembrandt painting, in front of you versus seeing a digital version of it, one of the first things you notice is how much he just loaded that brush with paint and just smeared it and skewered it around the nostrils and eyes and created three-dimensional pimples and varicose veins and discolorations, and you could feel the oily skin of the model himself, who used the most brutal too in that regard. That's going to become much more of a thing moving forward. And what will really make this manifest is going to be a combination of two things. The advancement in styluses, where it's going to become far more powerful and capable in that regard to mimic natural mediums, to use a traditional paintbrush, for instance, but combine that with AR, where you'll be able to actually feel the three-dimensionality of that paint, of that medium, whatever it is that you're using. That we're going to be painting with three-dimensional paint rather than two-dimensional paint. I think we're on the cusp of that. It is by far not a far-fetch. We're right around the corner from seeing this kind of innovation. Now, I want to turn the page and talk for a moment about art styles. Now, of course, styles change. This isn't prediction, this is reality, right? Life changes, fashion changes, trends change, etc. But from my experience, where I've seen art be in the past, and where I've seen certain things dissolve, and then where I've seen other things where I've feared certain things dissolving, but they didn't. They held on tight, and not as a last-ditch effort, a last battle cry before death, but rather they held on surprisingly and presented a side of themselves in terms of its style that demonstrated that it was not in fact at risk of death. It just was going through a transitional period. And this big prediction that I've made has to do with classical cartoon animation. Incidentally, my original professional background. Of course, if you've followed my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I have a degree in classical film animation. I was a cartoonist before I got into fantasy art and the kind of stuff I do today. And as I've mentioned, as many people I'm sure have mentioned in the past, when 3D came out, 2D took a nosedive. And I think the big fear was that 3D was the future, and that 2D was a dying breed, and it was just a matter of time until eventually it dissolved. But it didn't. It was kind of like, like how flowers retreat into the soil during the winter seasons, and you think they're dead, but then spring comes and all of a sudden these plants just pop out of nowhere, even after millions of years of snowball earth, the earth that freezes over. The moment there's a thaw, whoop, plants are right back again. Or the desert, completely barren and dry and arid, and then a monsoon falls, and within a week the entire plain is covered in grass. Cartooning has been that. It has gone through this hibernation period since 3D surfaced. And one of the things that was very heartwarming to see, and something that I keep witnessing time and time again, not voluntarily, not out of any sense, any feelings of nostalgia, just out of witnessing reality, witnessing what's happening, is that cartooning doesn't die. Traditional 2D animation does not die. And the best proof of this, where the quality of cartoon animation really rears its head, is every single year when I go to the end of year gala for the animation students at the college that I taught at for years, at the Cégep of Old Montreal. So a shout out to Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. Every year they have a gala at this beautiful theater, and they have 2 nights, the 2D animation and the 3D animation. And both evenings, both soirees are equally awesome, but for 2 completely different reasons. I'm always reminded of the fact that these 2 worlds of animation, at least in today's day and age, are 2 very different forms of expression that are exclusive of one another and both hold their own weight. 3D animation is technically impressive, it's immersive with the lighting and atmosphere and the fancy camera angles and the precision. There's many things you can do in 3D animation that in 2D is a monumental task, almost impossible. But it lacks certain organic, personalized qualities that 2D animation has in its very nature. The fact that 2D animation is that the line art and the distortion of that shape and that the texture of the stroke and the natural organic imperfections of the human hand resonate and translate into this human, flawed, but very refined expression of the artist. It's bridging that gap between a personal, very personal form of self-expression and the animated product that it creates. There's a personalization that still exists in traditional cartoon animation that just can't be replaced by a computer. I can't describe it, but there's this energy, there's this life to traditional animation, to traditional cartoon hand-drawn animation, that it just can't be replaced. And it's heartwarming every time I see it. And I have an emotional reaction to it, perhaps a little bit out of nostalgia, but I don't necessarily have a bias for or against it. It's something that I just witness and am pleased to see. And moving forward, I have a feeling that this reality will become more and more mainstream, that this reality will be exploited. And I mean that not only in a personal artistic sense, I mean this in a production budgetary sense. That because 3D animation has been the trend, it has been the source of innovation, it has been the advancement of technology, the money has gone in that direction. But I think moving forward, the appreciation for traditional hand-drawn art will be celebrated more and more moving forward by producers, by people who are helping to subsidize animated films. And traditional 2D animated works are going to start to pop up in more abundance. They're going to become far more mainstream again moving forward. There's going to be not a revival, because it never died, a huge resurgence of classical 2D hand-drawn animation. Perhaps if AR and drawing in a three-dimensional space might contribute to that, maybe not. Maybe it'll continue in the same form that it has for decades. We'll see. But the human hand is going to start playing a much more, the natural organic flaw and imperfection of the human hand is going to play a much more important role in digital and animated art moving forward. Mark my words. Now, while we're on the subject of traditional art, the next thing I want to talk about is national influences. Trends. Where, for instance, if we go back a few decades ago, barely anybody knew about anime and manga, and I remember I've probably even spoken about it in earlier art talks, because I'm old enough to remember the emergence of anime and Japanese animation. The early opinion by a lot of traditional Disney-esque classical animators, when I first saw anime, and a lot of my colleagues first saw the early versions of anime like Akira or Ninja Scroll or that kind of stuff, and we saw the way it was animated, our first reactions was, this is garbage. I'm being legit with you. When you need to see the 2-frame animation, when we had spent our entire careers and our education learning how to translate things fluidly into 3-dimensional space and maintaining volumes and making an effort to create this illusion of 3-dimensionality. When anime first reared its head, and of course we were ignorant to the grandeur of it and the history of it, we had just seen a few very basic examples of it. The original reaction to anime was, ugh, This is kind of shit. But we were ignorant. And then thanks to Hayao Miyazaki, which you might not know, if it wasn't for Hayao Miyazaki, then big names in animation, people who really took this stuff seriously, real big name North American classical animators took notice and went, oh, maybe there's something there. And it was that Miyazaki was really the gateway drug into anime for everybody. And, the older folk slowly took a liking to it. We slowly warmed up to the idea of it and started to see more and more talent. Whereas younger audience took to it immediately, and it exploded as a result of it. So it became mainstream, and then, now in 2022, 2 out of 3 of my students were raised and learned exclusively based off of anime and have a very strong, very noticeable anime influence in their artwork. And it's something that I encourage and celebrate with my students. It's something that we work on together. Look at artists like Ethan Becker. He's a North American anime artist. That was unheard of 20 years ago. That didn't exist. It just didn't exist. Now, where am I going with this? What anime has done is more than just expose us to the beauty and to the incredible brilliance of Japanese animation. However, it's not going to end there. And I think that moving forward in the next 10 years, based off of the fact that anime is no longer, it is a very celebrated culture, and it's a very now assimilated culture of art in North America. It's really become a part of the DNA of North American art now. It's got a huge influence in it, and all of the artists moving forward, and I love that. It's not going to end there. And what it's done is it's unlocked this world of animation. Since we're such a connected world online, we are far more exposed to and educated and less ignorant on different cultural influences in animation. In the next 10 years, there's going to be another one of these big discoveries where, of course, everybody's aware of different cultural influences in art and animation. We're going to discover and click with another culture of animation, another entire ecosystem of animation, and it's going to become big. And it's going to, just like anime, trickle its way into the mainstream and push the quality of our art and the innovation of our art, basically doing national collabs with different cultures in our artistic style. And these are going to combine together to create an even bigger, new and enhanced version of art and animation as a whole. And this is going to, like anything, it's going to influence film. It's going to influence games. It's going to influence animation. It's going to be really exciting. And I would love, like everything else I've discussed tonight, I'd love to hear where you think the future cultural explosion will be in animation. Now, let's flip one more final page and talk a little bit about art careers. And one of these art career movements, in fact, I don't think it's going to be necessarily exclusive to art, something that we've already seen happen today, especially due to COVID, because it's 2022, so we're still in lockdown after a couple of years with COVID. In hopefully in 2032, we won't still be dealing with this, at least in the way we are today. Art jobs, in fact, jobs in general, will most likely be exclusively online. People, like the whole concept of trekking downtown to work in some studio, will in most part be a thing in the past. Unless we get tired of working from home and voluntarily move ourselves back into the studio. But I can't imagine the gross majority of people voluntarily wanting to go through the whole traffic jam bullshit again. Just 45-minute drive after an exhausting day at work, commuting and taking the bus and traveling across town to go to your office just so you can eat up resources in a different space, in a foreign environment that isn't tailored necessarily to your personal particular work style and setup? No. A lot of that is past. And one of the things I've spoken about in the past is my last full-time job was working in Ottawa on a Disney show. And I had to travel to Ottawa with a little boy in diapers at the time. I had to travel to Ottawa to do my job, to work. And despite that, despite being distanced from my family every week for 5.5 days a week, I brought it up with my bosses and found it incredibly ironic that all of my artists that I supervised were working remotely, confided in most part, located in Ottawa, Canada, but remote nonetheless. I rarely saw my fellow artists face to face. We worked online. And I told my boss, well, why can't I do that? I mean, heck, I'm traveling all the way from Montreal to Ottawa to work every week, and I have to find a place to board. Why can't I just work from home? And his answer to that was, unsurprisingly, we don't do it that way. And I went, all right, fair enough. Have it your way. Because working from home was not amazing. There was that fear of leaking information, fear of people, leaking, private NDA stuff out online, but people can do it anyways. It's very easy to leak information, right? So the risk is there whether you have people within eyeshot or not. It's going to happen. So you just have to trust people, sign good contracts, and hire people remotely. And now with Photoshop and everything moving digital, it just makes sense. It's the logical next move. Yes, there's cons to that. You're not getting up and moving and traveling, but it's not necessarily the healthy version of travel. Getting on a subway or a bus and commuting with a bunch of people who are sick and with COVID and viruses and shit. It's not optimal. And people are going to have to find different ways of keeping themselves fit and moving. But having the freedom to be able to work from home, it makes sense as well from an international sense. The last company I worked for was based in the States, doing fantasy art for Fantasy Flight and teaching my full-time mentorship, which I still do today, lovingly. And whenever I had free hours, I would invest it into developing fantasy cards. And I did it from home. Everything was done digitally. Everything was done within seconds. It was super easy and quick. And, your paycheck arrived every month. Easy peasy. And now everybody's doing it that way. Now my entire family is working from home. My only fear is that this trickles into the school system, which I think is a big problem. My kids, yet again, are at home, still right now, taking their classes as I speak right now, taking their online class. I think that is not cool. And I think that for students, I think that it's incredibly important to get out, meet friends, get some fresh air, play around, be around kids and be loud and obnoxious and swing and scream and get the rust out type of idea. Staying home all the time is depressing, especially for young kids with a lot of energy. You don't want to. Last thing a parent ever wants is to watch their kids sit in front of a television screen for 9 hours a day. It's horrible. So I think with regards to the school system, I don't wish for that to happen. But if you're an adult and you've got a gym membership and you want to work from home, more power to you. I really think this is going to become far more mainstream. And I think that one of the things that COVID is doing is it's kind of sealing the deal in that regard. And that, in a nutshell, for now at least, is my predictions for where the world of art will be in 2032. And that said, this is my open invitation to every single one of you listening to take what I've said, scrutinize it, tear it apart, build on it, and grow with it. Consider this conversation an artistic evolving work in progress that I'm giving you the blueprints to, and you can take it off in your own direction. I want to get involved in the conversation as well. I think this is a very fun topic to brainstorm together, and who knows, maybe in a couple of months I'll post an updated version with all of your awesome ideas as well. Sound good? So with that said, of course, I love you all with all my heart, and happy painting. Take care.